finest under the sea!
Yeah, sure, but where's the pizzazz?
Huh?
Look at this place. I mean, what is the theme here?
Yet another derelict space station, with a generic knockoff Autobot chasing you.
It's boring! Food, water, atmosphere.
Purely based on the promotional material, Metroid Dread looks like a derivative at best game with little to nothing to add to the series. A strong statement to be sure, but I mean it. Everything about this game screams low effort in terms of design, originality, and substance. Sure, the graphics are HD and shiny, as any modern graphics can be. Let's move beyond that and focus on the art direction, world design, and ideas being brought to the table. First things first, what is a Metroid game? Well, if you're at all familiar with the series, it was built on exploration from the very first game. Looks like they're touting that as an inclusion, so I'll tentatively take their word for it. Exploration being a given, what other aspects of Metroid games have made them so good and created its cult fan following? One thing most Metroid games excel at is creating a sense of melancholic isolation. A dark atmosphere brought about by game mechanics, strong art direction, and eerie yet memorable music. Metroid often gives the player quiet moments of introspection, where they'll want to stop and just absorb the surroundings. Take Super Metroid's Meridia for instance. Stripped down to its bare bones, it's just a maze you wander through on your way to fight the Dragon boss and acquire the space jump. But the visuals, combined with the haunting melody, transform this area into a dreamlike plunge to the black ocean floor. Had this area been given regular old stage music, with the same old tile set as the rest of the game, Meridia would cease to be such a memorable, engaging stop on your journey to recover the last Metroid. Now, because of increased hardware capabilities, the Prime games push atmosphere way further than Super Metroid. Take a look at Prime 2's Aegon Wastes. A lush meadow turned harsh desert due to the corruption of the Luminoth's homeworld. This area's music has an air of cold desolation, with occasional faint metallic chimes. The Prime games take atmosphere even a step further by providing the player with rich lore to dig into and increase their understanding of the world and the story taking place. Like with the Chozo Ruins, the player learns of the Chozo way of life, their knowledge of events to come, their rise to immortal form, their efforts to stop the spread of Phazon, and their eventual fall to insanity as the Phazon corruption torments them in their ghost form. By the way, it's not canon. These sorts of calm and dark atmospheres often also come with a creeping fear factor, the sense that something horrifying is always on the verge of overtaking the player. It's not like your typical jump scares or slasher monsters. It's a more primal fear, one we've all experienced before, that all-encompassing terror that grips you after you've just turned off your bedroom light and must now walk to your bed alone in the darkness. To give you an example, after having conquered the Magmoor Caverns and the Phendrana Drifts, you return to the Chozo Ruins to use your newfound Spider Ball. Everything's going well until... The fear experienced in this section is so visceral because the player just stumbles upon it while going about their business. Had there been a cutscene with foreshadowing and a close-up on the ghost's face, showing Samus slowly approaching before being ambushed, it would have lost its impact. A major strength of Metroid is allowing the player full control of Samus most of the time. It makes you feel like you're the one walking into that dark hallway. Samus isn't going to do it for you. You'll find sections like this all over the Prime trilogy. There's the Metroid pit in the Phazon Mines later in this game, the Ing zombies from Prime 2, and the GFS Valhalla from Prime 3, to name a few. Oh, and basically all of Prime 2. Prime 2's Dark World is an ongoing nightmare full of its own challenges for the player to overcome. Retro did an amazing job molding a large chunk of the game's mechanics around this horror concept, while keeping the core Metroid experience intact. The game is still about exploration, and they use that to make you very uncomfortable. You have to explore this hellscape, whether you want to or not. These air pockets being your only chance at survival. When one disappears, you freak the fuck out. Or worse, sometimes the only way forward is to leave your comfort zone entirely. It's moments like these that made me fall in love with this franchise. Late hours spent digging into the deepest parts of these games, the dark underbellies of their worlds. Metroid is at its best when it uses its art, music, and new game mechanics to enhance the classic gameplay with a gloomy and sometimes unsettling atmosphere. Equally important to Metroid is what I'll call logical world design. What I mean is, the game environment needs to do more than just be a level with a power-up at the end. Firstly, the game world must be designed with backtracking in mind. I know backtracking has gained somewhat of a negative connotation these days.
This game is slow, unappealing, and oh god, the backtracking. Not the backtracking!
But it's very important to Metroid's signature gameplay style. To make backtracking feel rewarding, the game must leave interesting things for the player to find upon returning. Not always just random power-ups hidden behind obvious doors, but also more of the world to uncover. To give you an example, in Prime, I know, I use that game as an example a lot, it's just so useful. After the player returns to the Chozo ruins, they'll find this small tunnel in the furnace room, which leads to a whole new area of the ruins, complete with its own music. There they'll find all new puzzles and upgrades, and a quick shortcut to the Talon overworld. This is where the player acquires the Ice Beam. But imagine if this weapon was in some room just slapped on the end of the Fendrana Drifts or something. It wouldn't be the same. With this arrangement, it feels like the world consistently has new things to offer when you revisit old areas, like there's more to it than you initially thought. Even Fusion, one of the most linear Metroid games, has you returning to earlier areas to do new things. Sector 5 comes to mind as an area with many layers that successively peel back the more upgrades you get. When you first arrive, your goal is to get the Ice Missile download. Easy enough once you unlock the security doors. Not too long later, you return to the same place for power bombs, before encountering the SAX. Finally, you return to Sector 5 to find it completely destroyed. Bits of the walls and ceiling are blocking your path, and some doors are completely busted, allowing you to get through without security access. It's then that you fight Nightmare, perhaps the most memorable boss in Fusion. This area is a great example of a world designed for backtracking. Each time the player returns, a new part of the area is explored and new items are discovered. It makes Sector 5 interesting and memorable. The second part of logical world design is a sense of history to the environment. You must feel as though it truly exists in the game's universe and things have happened there. There are remnants of past events, including physical marks on the world, and maybe even accounts of those events. A lot of hack video essayists like to call this environmental storytelling. Super Metroid did this brilliantly in its wrecked ship section, a research vessel that mysteriously crash-landed on Zebes. Upon closer inspection, the player finds that it's haunted? There's broken wiring everywhere, downed robots, and doors that are offline. Once the head ghost is defeated, the ship comes back online and the player can explore further. So I guess the ghosts were the ones keeping the power off. Imagine if this section never showed any signs of damage, if the level designers hadn't put that much thought into it. Most players probably wouldn't be able to put their finger on it, but something would be missing for sure. Once again, the Prime games take this concept to the next level by adding lore to their environmental details. In Prime 2, the player stumbles upon the aftermath of an Ing ambush on Galactic Federation troopers. Left behind are the personal logs of each member of the team. By reading these scans, you get to know these men and their personalities, however concise the scans may be. You learn their duties, their likes and dislikes, and their relationships to one another and thoughts on Samus, all the while knowing that they met their demise on this hostile planet. It serves to humanize the Federation and highlight the great threat of the Ing. Even the Federation's greatest troopers fell before this enemy. Optional details like these add up. It shows the developer is paying close attention to detail. In a similar vein, you encounter Luminoth warriors who also fell to the Ing. When you read their final testaments, they offer a more enlightened perspective than the Federation troopers. Their war with the Ing almost comes across as a religious matter for them. On top of giving you clues to finish the game, they increase your understanding of their culture. So already, the game is giving you two distinct perspectives on the main enemy through stylized lore entries found on NPC carcasses. That's Metroid as fuck. Holy goddamn fuck. Can I just gush about Elysia for a few minutes? You've got a steampunk floating observatory city in the sky maintained by sentient robots abandoned by their creators, the Chozo. They were tasked with continuing the Chozo's search through the stars to gather information on the big bad planet that you find towards the end of the game. At some point, they run low on extra fuel and spare robot parts, so they enter hibernation, still being fed the information gathered by their equipment through dreams. They witness the events leading up to the first Prime game, including their creator's near extinction. They express their despair and their inability to help. This fucking place makes me hard. You want to talk about attention to detail and environmental storytelling? This planet is the holy grail of Metroid. Throughout the area, you fight hostile robots left by the Elysians to guard their precious information center. The storm clouds in the distance, the whirring of gears, the little maintenance droids going about their business, and the music. That damned music. Take me home, Jesus. The more you uncover the lore, the more you find out what happened to this place and you discover who's in the process of overtaking it. Eventually you find out that Gore, a fellow bounty hunter, deceived the Elysians and started fucking with their shit. A hearty battle ensues. Take notes, Mercury Steam. This is how you give a boss fight context that heightens the stakes and makes the payoffs feel earned. The monitors even show Gore's face, indicating that he's the one in control of the station. Later on, after you restore control to the Elysian's Aurora unit, the monitors show the Aurora unit instead. When I think of Metroid's greatest moments, Elysia is among the first that come to mind. For me, this area is straight up transcendent in its awe-inspiring beauty. I haven't even talked about Xeno research, the disturbing place on Elysia's B site that harbors Phazon Metroids. You open the first fucking door and you instantly know shit be fucked. First time playing this, you know I was inching forward every step of the way. Metroids are on the loose, but this time they can phase through walls. You have to turn off the power just to get the new upgrade, which means the Metroids are free to molest you as you beat cheeks out of that bitch. All this to say, the thing I love most about my favorite Metroid games is it's the developers thinking about more than just bare gameplay essentials and pretty visuals, but about how all of that ties together into the story to give you one huge, meaty game to absorb and replay and learn new things on each playthrough. Originality and inventive designs are also essential to making this work. If Skytown looked like just a copy of Frigate Orpheon or Chozo Ruins, it wouldn't reach such god-tier status. It'd be serviceable, sure, but Retro was aiming for something greater, something new. Now, this isn't to say that a Metroid game must have all of these things all the time to be good. Hell, I'm not even saying any Metroid game is particularly bad, but we play these games for more than just the raw gameplay mechanics. At least I do. I play to connect to the game's world and immerse myself in its atmosphere. When a game lacks these things, I can tell, and it brings down my experience. It's why the Prime games are my favorites, and right behind them is Super Metroid, followed by the rest of the series. Seeing as how Mercury Steam is returning to co-develop Metroid Dread, it seems pertinent to discuss their past work. Besides Metroid, the most notable other game they've worked on is Castlevania Lords of Shadow. I tried finding some non-IGN opinions online, and I came across this small thread. The pattern seems familiar. Make a sequel to a well-established game, while missing out on what made the game great, then make another sequel with frustrating stealth elements. Sounds familiar. In all seriousness, let's talk about Samus Returns. It'll serve as a good yardstick for Metroid Dread and what we might expect. Also, I just have an axe to grind with Samus Returns, especially seeing the retarded defenses some of its fans put up for it. We're gonna start with the low-hanging fruit and then get to the good stuff. Firstly, I don't much care for its art style. It's just so bright. My poor eyes. People give Prime 3 shit for being too neon, but this is ridiculous. They just needed to turn down the bloom a little and increase the contrast. Beyond that, 2.5D was the wrong choice for a 3DS Metroid game. You just can't get a high amount of detail here. On top of that, it makes it feel weird that we're sticking to tile-based gameplay when we could just do literally anything we want. Imagine what they could come up with if they didn't restrict themselves to one-block increments for everything. Prime proved that you could even do morph ball puzzles without tiles. There's also a lack of personality in the animations. Samus just goes from standing to flipping without any transition. There's not even a wall jump animation. But what irked me the most is the space jump. Look at this goofy shit. Would it have hurt you to model an animation smeared spin or something? Hell, I can do it right now. Another issue is the color choice. I think the Gaming Brit Show put it best in his review.
Everything in this game is so bright, the colors are so in your face and vibrant, it lacks the darker, edgier mood of past Metroid games, and as a remake of Metroid 2, one of the darkest, edgiest Metroid titles, I feel like that's a bit of a blunder.
You can't really take threats as seriously when they're all done up in cheery colors. Even the end of the game has this sickeningly warm palette. Playing a remake of Metroid 2, you'd expect to see this nice gradient where imagery gets more and more fucked up the deeper you go. Alright guys, I gotta do it. I'm gonna bring it up. AM2R did it better. I know people like to pretend AM2R doesn't exist and act like it didn't do a better job at representing Metroid 2. However, you can't ignore it, especially now that it has a dedicated community upkeeping and improving it. To ignore it would be a disservice to Metroid fans. A lot can be learned from its design, and we should start demanding at least the same amount of care from Nintendo as what went into it. Anyway, back to Samus Returns. I wish the game wasn't so heavy-handed with the cutscenes. Yeah, some of them look really cool and all, but it takes you out of the experience. Just playing the beginning of the game, I felt a little bit of that Metroid feel. You had the dead Grand Federation troopers, the quiet atmosphere. Then out of nowhere, the first flying enemy attacks you and you get this dumb zoom in with a paragraph ultimately all boiling down to the game telling you to press X to parry. At that point, the gritty atmosphere was spoiled. This sort of interruption happens very frequently, especially at the beginning, over-explaining things that should just be obvious. They don't give you any critical information, but they remove your agency for a few seconds. It makes you feel like you're just watching Samus rather than controlling her. It's a bit insulting to the player's intelligence, really. Now, I hear you saying, well, the Prime games had cutscenes that took you out of it, not just for level entrances and boss deaths, but also some regular rooms. Yes, the Prime game uses cutscenes for establishing shots and boss deaths. Things they want to make sure you're looking at in this 3D game where you could just be facing a wall. 3D space is very confusing sometimes, so occasionally you need a camera shot to show you a door you might not have otherwise been aware of. I really don't need to clarify how easy it is to notice things in 2D. You step into a room and you have the whole thing right there to see. No confusion to be had. Establishing cutscenes in that setting are just redundant. As for the one original boss Mercury's team added to the game, they had one original boss character in this game, and they chose to make the Diggy Boy. Not the worst design I've ever seen, but it's hard to imagine they were beating their heads against the wall trying to come up with a radical new design for a big robot with drill arms. You look at Retro's idea palette, and it's just full of crazy shit they were dreaming up. The concept art library is astounding. Then you see Samus Returns concept art, and it's just the one original enemy and some cool images of Samus and some normal baddies. Not that I wanted them to pack this game full of shit that just doesn't fit. And don't get me wrong, I actually liked their Metroid designs, but you'd think with all the liberties they're taking with this game, they'd have a little more to offer in terms of original content. Once again, AM2R was more creative, putting its own spin on a lot of the classic enemies, and even coming up with many of its own. Now, let's talk about the game design of Samus Returns. The way the game holds the player's hand actually damages the overall experience. First things first, the parry. I get what they were going for with it, adding more options to the moveset, but the way they designed the game around the parry doesn't really work that well. It interrupts the flow of gameplay by forcing you to stop and wait for the little indicator. You do next to no damage if you don't go for the parry, so you have no option but to use it. It becomes very repetitive on small enemies, and it becomes a crutch for bosses. All you have to do is wait for that obvious shiny telegraph and you get tons of free damage. Contrast this with bosses in a game like Hollow Knight, where you have to be quick and smart about striking your enemy, because at the same time you have to avoid its attacks and manage your health. Most bosses don't give you big, obvious openings. You have to make your own openings and attack when you think it's safe. It makes defeating the boss so much more satisfying. Next, there's the Aeon scan. A-E-I-O-N scan. Huh. Anyway, the scan ability reveals all the hidden parts of the map around you. It's super convenient, but that destroys the thrill of exploration and makes 100%ing the game unprecedentedly easy. Maybe if it were a late game power-up, it would be good for sweeping up the last few upgrades after the player has already uncovered most of the map. Similar to the X-Ray from Super Metroid, but as it stands, it removes so much exploration from the experience, it turns into an action platformer with light exploration elements rather than a game driven by exploration with action as a supplement. Not making for a great Metroid game. And from a mile away, I hear you saying, well, if you don't like it, just don't use it, dumbass. Sure, you can try to ignore it, but Mercury Steam wants you to use it. They're perfectly happy with players just skipping exploration altogether and just focusing on the monster fights. This is a power-up that should be relegated to a baby mode option in the menu. But it's front and center. Instead of carefully designing their world to unravel naturally through the player's curiosity, they take the easy route for development and just give you a reveal map button. This game bends over backwards to baby the player, especially when you consider the autosaves right before every single boss and Metroid encounter. The problem with the autosaves is they remove the stakes from each battle. You can fuck up as many times as you want because you know you'll just be able to start over right from the previous room. It renders save stations redundant. It means you don't have to be on the lookout for saves when you get close to a boss area, which means you don't have to be careful at all, making the overall game laughably easy. Another convenience that spoils the experience is fast travel. Fast travel does a lot to hurt the game's memorability. The amount of time you spend in the game's areas is minuscule when you can just skip over all of them on your way back to collect some upgrades. You're basically done with each area after the first time through. Instead of taking the time to make their world fun to traverse, Mercury Steam sprinkled it with a bunch of teleport pads. And that brings me to Samus Return's world design. It tends to all blend together even after the first two playthroughs, without many memorable moments sticking out. Part of that is the reason I stated earlier, the fact that you only get to see most areas once before moving past them. Because Metroid 2 is structured in such a linear way, it's in any remake's best interest to try to make its areas as memorable as possible. These maps just look like an obstacle course and not much else. Once again, AM2R did it better. It gave each of these areas a unique purpose, complete with its own lore, and yes, environmental storytelling. For example, the Metroids only use the Chozo buildings for hunting, returning back to regroup in their nests deep in the breeding grounds. And as I mentioned previously, these breeding grounds get more and more disturbing the further the Metroids evolve. The most Samus Returns does to differentiate between its areas is change backgrounds or give you grass or metal to walk on instead of dirt and stone. The point is, nothing in any one area was interesting enough to differentiate it from the other areas. This isn't helped by the game's music. It's all just electronic drones or songs copied and pasted from better Metroid games. Bro, I don't even care about quality right now. I'm just here noticing, literally, like half the songs here are copied and pasted from another game. Basically Prime 3 corruption music, but they maybe added a little bit. But the bulk of the song is from Prime 3, copied and pasted. Final scene. Straight up, look up Prime 2, the after boss theme. It's gonna be the same. Let me show you. What the fuck, bro? They're just pulling music, man. Literally right out of Prime. Magmoor Caverns, they just straight up took it. They literally just took this and layered some shit on top of it and called it a day. Except they added shit. So they're either just straight up pulling music, or they're taking the Game Boy music and just doing it in a very ambient sort of way, which kind of makes it feel like part of the background and you don't really remember it. Appearance fanfare. And what I think happened is they did take this and just morph it and EQ it and stuff to try to make it sound different. But they used it as a base. I can tell. It's either ambient, it's this, or it's just straight up taken out of Prime. This one makes it listenable, the original Game Boy version, but it makes it super ambient. You can't really tell what the melody is. It kind of hides the melody. This one just straight up takes the melody and makes it listenable. We need more effort put into the music to make the game's areas more memorable, because right now it's like most of these are just fucking ambient drones, or they're stolen from another game. So yeah. Nary an original melody to be heard. It serves to make the game feel like one giant blur of an experience. There's no tonal difference between early and late areas in the game. Remember when Metroid music used to capture the desired mood of an area while also giving you catchy original melodies? Tim remembers. It would have been awesome to see Mercury Steam implement something like the scan visor in 2D. You'd get so much more detail on the different enemies, why each area looks the way it does, and what led up to this mission. Instead, we're left to imagine that part ourselves, or just not think about anything. Thus far, I've avoided talking about the elephant in the room. The greatest sin of this game. The most controversial moment in Metroid history right behind the Samus crying scene. Of course, I'm talking about Jerry Seinfeld making a cameo appearance as the Diggernaut. Nah, let's talk about the Ridley scene. This shit not only breaks Metroid 2's atmosphere and ending, but it also breaks Super Metroid's opening in multiple ways at the same time. Metroid 2 was perfectly capstoned by that original somber, reflective ending. The player was meant to think back on the genocide they just committed while carrying the last member of the species in tow. They robbed that creature of its mother. But there's no time to think about that, it's shooting time! Yeah, let's have a character that's completely irrelevant to the game's story come crashing down for a cheap nostalgic thrill. There was zero build up to Ridley. He just shows up big-lipped alligator style and mindlessly attacks.
He just shows up! He just fucking shows up!
This is some Star Wars sequel tier writing on Mercury's part. Forget the atrocity Samus just committed in the name of the Federation, no need to contemplate the player's morality or anything. And then you start to realize how little sense it makes for Ridley to be there in the first place. If he knew Samus was carrying the last Metroid alive, he wouldn't have just come right out and attacked. Wasn't that the whole point of Ridley showing up in Super Metroid right after Samus leaves Ceres Station? He's cunning enough to wait until she leaves it alone, because making her aware that he's onto her could lead to her killing the Metroid just to keep it out of his hands, which would be a logical move on her part. No, his smartest option would be to wait until the Metroid is alone with the defenseless scientists. This scene breaks down even further when you look at the choices Samus makes. If she knew Ridley and the pirates were onto her, she would never have let the Metroid out of her sight, especially in the custody of some defenseless researchers. Her smartest option would have been to bring it to the Federation for safekeeping until the pirates could be dealt with. At this point, she's been following the Federation's every order and doesn't question them until Fusion, or at the earliest Other M. Had Mercury Steam simply left the ending alone, we wouldn't have these inconsistencies. They could have simply shown a scene where it really spies Samus flying off the planet before making a quiet pursuit, undetected. In order for Super Metroid's intro to make any sense, Samus needs to be unaware she's being followed. This was just embarrassing. And another thing, if you've been paying attention to the footage on screen, you'll have noticed that Ridley has cybernetic integrations in Samus Returns, but in Super Metroid he's completely biological. Yeah, so when I went and looked back at this ending, I saw this cute little scene. So in this little throwaway moment, they're trying to tell us that, in a matter of hours, Ridley just took off his cyborg parts and became a fully functional space pterodactyl. The wiki tries to explain this, but all they can say is, well, it must have happened, because that's the only way to explain this inconsistency. When the dedicated wiki fans responsible for coming up with the weirdest excuses for inconsistencies is at a loss, you know your shit be fucked. Lots of people defend this by saying, well, it's good because it canonizes the Prime games. Oh, sorry. Didn't know that. Immune from criticism. Firstly, they could have canonized the Prime games in any number of ways that doesn't brutalize the sequence of events in between Metroid 2 and Super Metroid. Secondly, I find it really dumb to be defending shit on the basis of canon, as if something being canon means it's automatically good. More on the fans later, though. All these things I have to say about Samus Returns point to one conclusion to make. Mercury's theme is defined by style over substance. In all the decisions I see them making, they choose the easier option to develop every time. Instead of making a rich world that's a joy to backtrack and discover new things, they plop down some fast travel teleporters. Instead of making combat rely on the player's skill, they give you a parry that works on every enemy. Instead of coming up with original tunes for their game, or hell, even remixed arrangements, they just insert electronic noise or steal music from an earlier title. Instead of paying close attention to the details of the story and making sure the lore fits and the payoffs are satisfying, they give you a quick nostalgic boss battle so you can get your gamer cummies. Now, you might be saying, well, it was their first game, give them a break, they'll improve over time. And that may be true, depending on how Metroid Dread turns out. But I know one thing for sure. Retro didn't need a warm-up game to get them used to developing for the Metroid series.
I began working at Retro Studios in April of 2000. I can remember when we were developing Metroid Prime 1 very early on. We were discussing with Mr. Miyamoto how we could explore Samus's control scheme or do something unique. Mr. Miyamoto said, well, what if Samus could take off her head and maybe put a head on that had bug eyes, or a head that had, saw in the dark or whatever, just switch heads. And then we realized what he was saying was, what if Samus had a means of perceiving the world in a different way? Whereas with a Western developer, you might say, what if you had X-ray vision, or what if you had thermal vision? He was saying, how do you perceive the world as a whole? That was really kind of the origin of how the whole visor system also grew.
They took their time, did their homework, and made something that will be appreciated for all time. And this brings us to the reveal of Metroid Dread. Oh, how I dreaded this moment. Alright, it's forward the morning, but I'm gonna make this quick disclaimer here. If this game ends up bringing the creativity, if it ends up being something beyond what Samus Returns was, I will eat every word I have said in this video. Like, honest to God, if they actually pull it together. If the game is more creative than what we've seen in the trailers, then hell yeah. If they have just been showing us the most boring parts of the game for some reason, then I am all in on this game. If some new information comes out, then consider me a changed mind, but as I'll get into, as it stands, I am not optimistic about Metroid Dread. But yeah. Anyway, on with the video. Remember all that shit I said about originality and inventive designs? I think they really dropped the ball on this one. Mercury's team can't hide behind the excuse of console limitations with this game. Every design choice is an intentional one, which is why it baffles me that they're choosing to stick with bright, fully lit environments instead of using light and shadow as a tool to evoke emotion. I just remember how all the Prime games used lighting to their advantage at any opportunity, especially in scary metal environments. They're also choosing to keep the same blocky, tile-based level designs despite being capable of so much more. Like, bruhs, you ever heard of a fucking slope? Maybe you don't see a big issue with it, but when I see those 1-block wide platforms and shit, the only thing that comes to mind is Mario Maker 2 super expert levels made by a 10-year-old. And here's another thing. Why, after Super Metroid, Metroid Other M, Metroid Fusion, and Samus Returns, are we back in another goddamn abandoned space station attached to generic monochrome caves? I can't even. Can you get any less creative with your environment design? What happened to that Metroid creativity? Seeing new and varied worlds with their own inhabitants that imprinted their culture onto the landscape. Nah, we out of ideas, Chief. Oh, but it's Sakamoto's original idea for Metroid Dread that he made in 2005. So? Maybe the ideas should have stayed in 2005 where it belonged. Do you know how many games feature an unkillable enemy that hunts you and you have to hide from it? The whole damn horror genre is practically built on this trope. And here they're touting it as a new innovative game design idea that you should piss your pants over. Hell, even Fusion sorta had that thing going on with the SAX. And they put some other gimmicks in there, like invisibility and... Spider-Man does whatever a spider can. They really do be trying to change the look of ladders and monkey bars and call it a new concept. And sure, they tweaked the parry slightly. Good job. It's just like Sakamoto can't get away from the themes and design of those classic titles, and he's teamed up with a company that's barely got their feet wet in the genre at all. So really, how could I expect anything but a derivative idea with lackluster design? Now, I know at least one person is gonna say, but my Prime games had space stations and you love the Prime games, and completely miss the context of my argument. Firstly, the space stations in Prime were only small parts of much bigger experiences that also offered many other diverse environments. Secondly, the Prime space stations did more interesting things than I'm seeing in Dread. Just fucking imagine if Dread's location looked half as scary as the GFS Valhalla. Just imagine if they really sold the horror, maybe looking something like Dead Space. Thirdly, when the Prime games did space stations, it wasn't like the last 2 games took place entirely on space stations, and it wasn't like we just played a remake of a game featuring nothing but brown caves. Another thing, it looks like with this title they're actively focusing on action elements rather than creating an interesting world with memorable landmarks. And now, more than ever, they're pushing to cater to a casual audience who have never played a Metroid game. But don't take my word for it though. Listen to how Sakamoto talks about this game.
ストーリーは重要ですが、決してファンのためだけのゲームではないです。基本は 2D アクションゲームなので、銀が最強の戦士になりきって暴れてもらえれば誰でも楽しんでもらえるはずです。これが初めてのメトロイドという人でも、ゲームのプロローグを見てもらえればストーリーがわからないということにはならないでしょう。むしろ今作が初メトロイドという人だからこその楽しみ方もあるんじゃないでしょうかね。EDS のサムスリターンズを共同開発したマーキュリースティームエンターテインメントはすごく優秀なチームだったんです。技術力は高いしセンスもいいし、なんといってもメトロイドというゲームの理解が半端なかったですね。パートナーと組んだらメトロイドドレッドは必ず完成すると確信しました。そして15年前に思い描いた以上のメトロイドドレッドがこうやって完成しました。でもそこはご安心ください。従来通りのゲーム性に磨きをかけて、アクションや探索要素の強化や工夫はバッチリです。
Oh, but don't worry guys, there will still be satisfying exploration. Despite all the marketing seeming to indicate that this is an action game first and foremost, ever since Other M, it seems Nintendo's ideas for Metroid are all staled and played out. To me, it seems like they didn't know what to do once the technology had outgrown their game design. Once the limitations were taken off, they still insisted on sticking to the Metroid they knew, and the creativity is suffering for it. Super Metroid was Sakamoto's breakout hit, and he's been drawing from that for every title since. Just look at what he did with Other M. Super Metroid influences all over that game, propping up the poor story that was written. I don't know. Maybe this game turns out to be a masterpiece. The best game to grace the series. But from where I'm sitting, it doesn't look likely. In either case, I still love the old Metroid games for what they were, and hope Prime 4 delivers on that Retro Studios goodness I've been lacking. Alright Tim, you fucking asshole. You made all this just to say you don't like it. Well, what do you want to see from the Metroid series? Simple as that, really. I just want to see new ideas that Metroid has never done before. Something they can truly hold up as a new gameplay idea. I'd also like to see more creative visuals. I want to see new and interesting settings, characters, and enemy designs. On top of all that, I want to see them really put some elbow grease into selling the atmosphere through carefully placed lighting and that Metroid brand of music. Give me some new melodies, damn it! I'm tired of re-listening to the same old ones in every game. Also, stop with this mentality that you need to baby the player or appeal to a casual audience. It doesn't help anyone. It alienates fans who have grown to know the series, who wind up feeling insulted that you're pandering to know-nothings. It means you have to make your games more shallow to make sure grandma in the back can understand everything. It's as if you took an outsider's perception of Metroid, especially people who only know Samus from Smash, and made that what the series is actually about. We've all met that guy. Oh, Samus, yeah, the shooty guy from the Smash Bros, yeah! There's those games with the dragon dude and it's all scary and stuff. Yeah, now I know what Metroid is all about. It's flanderization at its finest. You're flanderizing the series itself, boiling it down to only its most superficial aspects. You don't have to do that. The people who play these games are smarter than you think. Retro themselves admitted to designing their games with the fans in mind first, and it shows in their attention to detail.
Our gratification is when we read those message boards and we hear how much fun people have playing our games.
When Retro Studios develops games, the first audience that we think about are the fans of that series. And that is what drives our gameplay decisions.
喜んでいただけるものになったんじゃないかなと思ってますね。すごく豪華なものになってるんで、ぜひ遊んでほしいと思ってます。
After they whet our appetites with the phenomenal Mario and Zelda titles, Nintendo started really laxing on the effort they put into new games. Kirby Star Allies was really the first game I noticed with a significant drop in substance. Sure, it's kinda fun to play for about 5 minutes, but it gets old fast. Despite their claims that Luigi's Mansion 3 was a return to form for the series, it was really just a glorified level-based puzzle game, rather than the sprawling interconnected mansion of the first game. And who didn't get sick of hearing the complaints about Animal Crossing not keeping people's interest? The villagers all had just a few lines to say, and their personalities boiled down into identical archetypes rather than fleshed out characters. Nintendo games started being just enough to be passable, but they didn't go the extra mile like they used to make them great.
Also, check this out, guys. I'm like, this was wild to me, cause like, I don't know, you thought Daisy had the uncanny can we like really? This is gonna be tough because they're not next to each other. Look at the difference in physiology between Daisy and Pauline. It's like Super Mario phrenology or some shit. Like, one of them is not human is the point that I'm trying to make. Like, they can't both be, like, human. Guys, when they criticize this game for a lack of polish, this right here stands out in particular to me. Just again, like, I want you to know that last night, I stared at this victory screen and dissociated for like 8 minutes. Like, there's something, it's very empty and soulless and like devoid of anything. Like really look at it. Like, I want you to experience what I did. Like, just soak this in. Nintendo typically has more polish than this. Yeah, this feels a little bit jank. I don't know. There's something very jank about that to me. Imagine like this sick son of a bitch who looks into Daisy's cold, lifeless, soulless fucking eyes and like, and says, you know what? I've decided that this is gonna be my waifu.
But anywho...
Looking at this year's E3 cycle, it's funny how universally celebrated this game is across the internet. Nintendo fans like to treat every new game like it's the second coming of Christ. Remember, these are the people who went out and spent $80 for cardboard with a Nintendo logo on it, and immediately threw it away. The excuses they come up with for their consumerism are pathetic. Anyone claiming you should buy a game just to support a series are full of shit. That is a very bad practice. Don't buy something in the hopes of getting something better in the future. If you're so desperate for a new game in a series that you'll support a mediocre game just to keep the series alive, you need to stop. It sends a message to the company that you want more mediocre games in your favorite series, and it helps to ruin the soul of the franchise. Think about this. Sometimes a series just needs to be finished. Perhaps the original spark is gone, or there are no more ideas to explore with it. I'd rather a series be dead than constantly churning out half-baked sequels. Another idea for you. How about instead of turning to the faceless corporation to satisfy your cravings for a new game, turn to fan content to keep it alive. You know, the only people who still actually care. Look at what happened leading up to Sonic Mania. Fans worked on Sonic passion projects for years, and suddenly they're developing the next title in the series. Granted, Sega is a lot cooler about that sort of thing than Nintendo, but even if Mania never got made, the Sonic fan community would still be thriving in their own way. I sometimes see these fans who praise and defend every title Nintendo releases regardless of quality or missed potential. These clowns use all the mental gymnastics to defend a poorly designed game. Funny enough, they'll turn around and attack fan projects, mods, and emulators like they're the goddamn Inquisition purging the unrighteous. I just don't know what sparks this pro-corporate, anti-creativity attitude among some Nintendo fans. Are they just being contrarian? Are they just bitter that some fan games end up better than official games? Did AIM2R or HD Mario 64 kill their dog or something? Perhaps it's just a defense reflex they use when they equate a critique of a game to an attack on them. I don't know. I'm not a shrink. As for whether I'll buy the new game or not, I may. If I do, it'll be mainline Metroid's last chance. If it ends up being exactly how I'm predicting, no more wasting my time. I won't continue to support a series that puts minimal effort into its development while displacing the aspects I first fell in love with. Here's to hoping Prime 4 really gives a shit. Tim Deuces out. Mercury Steam can't hide behind the excuse of console limitations with this game. Game. Okay.
You got a tight little man pussy on you, don't you?